On a quiet afternoon in the library, Emily Harrison was carefully dusting the spines of old books. Her fingertips had developed a special gentleness from years of reading and caring for books. Having worked at the public library in the small town of Milford, Connecticut for 12 years, this place had become like a second home to Emily. Outside the window, autumn sunlight shone golden, and maple leaves planted in the library courtyard danced in the wind. The sound of patrons' footsteps, pages turning, and occasional small sighs, this daily symphony provided Emily with more comfort than anything else. Beyond the counter, a regular elderly lady was engrossed in a mystery novel, and a college student was studying hard for exams. Emily remembered their faces and sometimes received requests for book recommendations. 3 years ago, she had begun living alone in a small apartment located in a quiet residential area, a 15-minute walk from the library. It was a corner unit on the first floor, with a window facing a small garden where she could watch seasonal flowers bloom. Emily led a regular life, waking up early each morning, watering the garden, making coffee, and then heading to work. On weekends, her only pleasures were browsing neighborhood used bookstores and reading in small cafes. She had been estranged from her family for quite some time. Her mother Margaret was once known as a successful real estate agent in the local area. Though now semi-retired, she still wielded influence in the town's social circles. Margaret wasn't pleased that her daughter Emily had chosen the humble profession of librarian, and at family gatherings, she invariably lamented, "Emily is still single and just reads books at the library all day." Her sister Jessica had succeeded as an influencer with significant reach on social media. With content focused on beauty and lifestyle, she had 50,000 followers and earned substantial income from corporate sponsorships. Jessica's posts were always perfect, and their mother Margaret was proud of her success. In contrast to Emily, Jessica led a glamorous life and maintained a good relationship with their mother. Grandmother Dorothy was the only family member Emily could truly open her heart to. Dorothy had worked as a teacher for many years and, after retirement, remained actively involved in community volunteer work. Her house was an old Victorian-style building that Emily used to visit often as a child. Dorothy understood her granddaughter Emily's love of reading and always recommended new books to her. Recently, Emily had been intentionally limiting contact with her family. The reasons were complex and couldn't be explained in a few words. She'd had an argument with her mother over a small misunderstanding, and differences in values with her sister had become apparent. Only her grandmother was different, they still talked on the phone occasionally. Dorothy was the only person who understood Emily's feelings. After finishing work at the library, Emily quietly returned to her apartment as usual. Dinner was a simple salad and soup, with tea. On the table lay a half-read novel. As Emily opened the book, she hoped tomorrow would bring another peaceful day like today. Though thinking about family could be painful at times, she was satisfied with having built her own peaceful life. The next day, heavy clouds hung overhead. In mid-October, Connecticut's autumn was gradually deepening, and the morning air carried hints of winter. Emily spent a busy morning handling book lending duties and organizing new arrivals. As lunchtime approached, she finally found a moment to breathe. While brewing hot coffee in the break room, Emily gazed out at the cloudy sky through the window. She felt somewhat down, and it wasn't just because of the weather. The vague anxiety that had persisted since last night hadn't disappeared and continued to stir quietly in the depths of her heart. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, trying to calm her heart with its warmth. She picked up her smartphone and opened the news app as usual. After skimming through local news, library-related articles, and information about new books, she casually opened a social media app. Emily wasn't particularly active on social media, but occasionally checked updates from friends and colleagues. As she scrolled through her feed, a familiar name caught her eye. Jessica Harrison. It was her sister's post. Emily's finger stopped on the screen. Jessica's posts were usually filled with beauty product promotions and glamorous lifestyle photos, but today's post was clearly different. A message appeared in white text against a black background. Today we say goodbye to our beloved grandmother Dorothy. She lived a full life of 88 years and loved us until the very end. Grandma's teachings and memories will remain in our hearts forever. Rest in peace in heaven. Thank you, Grandma. Emily's smartphone nearly slipped from her hands. She hastily set her coffee cup on the desk and stared at the screen again with trembling fingers. Checking the post time, it had been uploaded an hour ago. Grandmother had died. And today was the funeral. No one had told her. Her heart pounded violently, and her breathing became shallow. Emily stood up from her chair and paced around the break room. She couldn't believe it. Grandmother Dorothy was gone. And none of her family had contacted her. To learn about it for the first time through her sister's social media post. With trembling hands, she searched for her mother Margaret's phone number. She hadn't been in contact since their last conversation 3 months ago. Her fingers shook as she tried to dial, making 2 wrong calls. On the 3rd try, she finally dialed the correct number and listened to the ringing tone. "Hello, this is Margaret." Her mother's voice sounded as calm as always, with a hint of fatigue. "Mom, it's me, Emily." She tried to hide the tremor in her voice but couldn't manage it. "Emily. What's wrong?" "I'm busy." There was clear bewilderment in her mother's voice. "I found out about grandmother. I saw it on Jessica's Facebook. Why didn't you tell me?" Emily's voice grew increasingly high-pitched.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Candlelight Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. She could hear Margaret sighing deeply. "Maybe I should have contacted you, but we haven't been talking recently, and I thought you probably wouldn't come anyway." "Probably wouldn't come. Grandmother was important to me. Why would you make that decision for me?" "Emily, please don't make a scene today. Everyone is tired. The funeral has already started, and there's no point in you coming now." "No point. I'm grandmother's granddaughter. I have the right to say my final goodbye." Margaret's voice became even colder. "I'll be honest with you, Emily. You coming would just be a nuisance. It would make everyone uncomfortable. The relatives would see you after so long and not know how to act around you. I want today to end quietly." Emily was speechless. Her mother's words were ice-cold, piercing deep into her heart. She'd been called a nuisance. Told that her very existence was an inconvenience to the family. "Mom, how can you say such horrible things? I just want to say goodbye to grandmother." "Emily, face reality. For the past 3 years, you've distanced yourself from the family and shut yourself away in your own world. If you showed up now, no one would welcome you. Especially not on a day like today. I had reasons for distancing myself from the family. But grandmother was different. Only grandmother understood me. Dorothy worried about you, but in her final weeks, she thought of you less and less. Just give up." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Her mother's words were cruel and merciless. The fear that her grandmother might have forgotten her and the reality of being completely rejected by her family struck her simultaneously. "Where is the funeral being held?" Emily asked in a trembling voice. "Emily, stop this. No one will be happy if you come. Tell me the location." This time Emily's voice carried strong determination. After another long silence, Margaret answered with a resigned tone. "St. John's Church. But please, don't cause a scene." Emily hung up without saying anything. She placed her smartphone on the desk and covered her face with both hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The grief of her grandmother's death and the anger and humiliation of being rejected by her family swirled violently together in her chest. Although her break time had long passed, Emily told her colleague Sarah that she had an emergency and asked to leave early. Sarah looked concerned but didn't probe deeply after seeing Emily's condition. Returning to her apartment, Emily retrieved a black dress from the back of her closet. It was a simple, elegant morning dress she had purchased when attending a friend's funeral. As she changed in front of the mirror, she confirmed her resolve. Whatever her mother said, whatever her sister thought, she had the right to say a final goodbye to her grandmother. She touched up her makeup and pulled her hair back. She kept her accessories modest and picked up a small black handbag. Gripping her car keys tightly, Emily took a deep breath. St. John's Church was a 20-minute drive away. While driving, Emily reflected on memories with her grandmother. Summer vacations spent at her grandmother's house as a child. Planting flowers together in the garden. The aroma of apple pie her grandmother made. Learning family history while looking at old photographs together. Only her grandmother understood her love of reading and always recommended new books. When the church came into view, Emily's heart was filled with complex emotions. Sadness, anger, and strong determination. Today, she would pay her respects to her grandmother and say her final goodbye. No matter what her family said, it was a right no one could deny her. She parked her car in the church parking lot and began walking quietly. The moment Emily pushed open the heavy wooden doors of St. John's Church, she felt the air of the sanctuary enveloped in silence. Afternoon sunlight cast colorful light through the stained glass, and white lilies were beautifully arranged at the altar. Grandmother Dorothy's casket was placed in the center of the church, surrounded by relatives and friends. The moment Emily appeared at the entrance, all conversation stopped abruptly. About 50 attendees turned around in unison to see her. Expressions of surprise, bewildered gazes, and clearly confused atmosphere enveloped the entire sanctuary. Emily straightened her back and quietly walked toward the back row. Only the sound of her high heels clicking on the marble floor broke the silence. She could see the backs of her mother Margaret and sister Jessica sitting in the front rows. Margaret didn't turn around, keeping her shoulders rigid and facing forward. Jessica glanced back once, and when their eyes met, she immediately looked away. Her expression showed obvious irritation. Aunt Helen waved a small greeting, but her smile seemed awkward. Cousin Michael looked at Emily with a troubled expression. Everyone was clearly flustered by her sudden appearance. Emily nodded slightly in greeting and quietly took her seat. Pastor Thomas stood at the pulpit and began speaking about Dorothy's life. Her dedicated work as a teacher, her contributions to the community, and her deep love for family. Emily listened while holding back tears, remembering her grandmother's gentle smile. Dorothy Harrison passed away peacefully surrounded by her loving family, the pastor's words echoed through the sanctuary. We are deeply grateful for the devoted love of the family members who stayed by her side until the very end. Emily felt her chest tighten. Family who stayed by her side until the end. That referred to family other than herself. She knew nothing about where her grandmother was at the end, or who was by her side. Next came the time for eulogies. First, her mother Margaret stood up. Dressed in a black suit, she was known to everyone as a woman of dignity. Margaret stood before the altar, looked around at the attendees, and began to speak. Mother Dorothy was our guiding light in life. Margaret's voice was controlled yet warm. Especially during her final months, even while bedridden, she always worried about us. Jessica and I visited Mother daily and did everything we could. Mother was happy until the end. We were always by her side. The attendees nodded quietly with sympathetic expressions. She could see several aunts dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs. Next, Jessica stood up. Unlike her usual glamorous social media appearance, her sister wore a modest black dress, playing the role of a grief-stricken granddaughter. Grandma was special to me, Jessica's voice was tearful. During her final week, I went to the hospital every day, holding Grandma's hand and talking to her. Grandma was prouder of my success than anyone. She always said, "Jessica, you are my pride and joy." Those words are my treasure. The attendees listened to Jessica's words with moved expressions. Several women were quietly shedding tears. Emily clenched her fists. Went to the hospital every day. She'd never heard of such a thing. Grandmother was proud of Jessica at the end. Then why hadn't anyone contacted her? When the eulogies ended and the pastor was about to offer the final prayer, Emily quietly stood up. The entire sanctuary fell silent again. "Excuse me," Emily's voice was quiet but resonated throughout the sanctuary. "I would also like to share my memories of grandmother." The pastor looked puzzled and glanced at Margaret and Jessica. Margaret's face went pale, and Jessica clearly showed an irritated expression. "Emily, there isn't time for," Margaret tried to stop her in a low voice, but Emily stepped forward. Standing before the altar, Emily opened her black handbag. She took out a photograph from inside. It was an ordinary printed photo, slightly aged but carefully preserved. Emily held the photograph up to chest height and showed it to the attendees. The entire venue gasped. The photo showed Grandmother Dorothy lying in a hospital bed with Emily sitting beside her. Both wore peaceful smiles, and you could see Grandmother's hand holding Emily's. "This is the last photograph of Grandmother and me," Emily's voice was quiet but strong. "It was taken at the hospital 3 weeks ago." The venue buzzed. Relatives looked at each other with confused expressions. Margaret and Jessica's faces grew even paler. "Grandmother remembered me until the very end," Emily continued. "She said, 'Emily, I'm so glad you came to see me. Tell me about the books you're reading.' And she asked me to take this photograph. She said, 'I want to make this a precious memory.'" The atmosphere in the sanctuary changed. Questioning expressions appeared on the attendees' faces. There was a clear contradiction between the story Margaret and Jessica had told about being by her side until the end, and the facts Emily was presenting. Aunt Helen let out a small, "Oh my." Cousin Michael frowned and stared at Margaret. "Emily, that was," Jessica tried to stand up, but Emily raised her hand to stop her. "Grandmother told me, family isn't about the length of time spent together, but the depth of its quality. And she taught me, the people who truly matter are those who stay by your side when you're in trouble." Emily carefully returned the photograph to her handbag and bowed deeply toward her grandmother's casket at the altar. "Thank you, Grandma. I will keep your love and wisdom in my heart forever. Rest in peace." In the silence, Emily returned to her seat. The attendees' gazes were different now. Questioning, confused, and several clearly showing angry expressions. The looks directed at Margaret and Jessica contained severity. Pastor Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly and hurried through the final prayer. When the funeral ended, the attendees moved to the assembly room next to the church. Normally, this would be a warm time to remember the deceased while sharing light refreshments and reminiscing. However, today's atmosphere was heavy, filled with tension as if everyone was waiting for something. Emily sat quietly in a corner of the assembly room, drinking coffee. Several relatives approached her but seemed unsure how to start a conversation. Meanwhile, Margaret and Jessica were on the opposite side of the room, talking with some old friends. However, their conversation also lacked its former naturalness. Aunt Helen approached Emily. She was Dorothy's sister and had been fond of Emily since childhood. "Emily, it's been so long. How have you been?" Helen's voice was warm but also carried a note of concern. "Yes, Aunt Helen. You look well, which is wonderful." Emily smiled, but her smile showed faint exhaustion. "About that photograph, could you tell me more? About you being with Dorothy at the end?" Emily took a deep breath and pulled out a small notebook from her handbag. It was a leather-bound journal filled with meticulous handwriting. "This is Grandmother's care record," Emily began to explain quietly. "I've been keeping it since 3 years ago when Grandmother's health began to deteriorate." Helen looked surprised. 3 years ago? But Margaret said Mother was healthy until recently. Grandmother didn't want to worry the family, so she hid her declining health. But she would call me sometimes and talk about hospital tests and her physical pain. Emily turned the pages of the journal. Look at this. Starting in September 2 years ago, I was visiting grandmother 3 times a week. First at home, then at the hospital. The journal contained detailed records. Dates, grandmother's condition, contents of meetings with doctors, names of prescribed medications, and even the contents of conversations with grandmother were carefully recorded. Today, Emily brought me a new book. The poetry collection we read together was so beautiful. Emily read aloud from a section recorded as her grandmother's words. Emily always listens patiently to my stories. She's grown into such a good girl. Tears welled up in Helen's eyes. Then what about Margaret and the others? Mother and sister only visited the hospital during the final 3 days when grandmother was in critical condition. Emily's voice contained no emotion, but the weight of that fact was evident in her words. Cousin Michael approached. He was a lawyer, known in the family as a rational person. Emily, could you show me that record? Michael's expression was serious. Emily handed over the journal. Michael looked surprised at the detail and consistency of the records as he turned the pages. This even has signatures from doctors and nurses. It's thorough enough to serve as official care documentation. I had the hospital staff verify it each time. I wanted to accurately understand grandmother's condition. The atmosphere in the room changed again. Margaret and Jessica noticed the conversation and approached with anxious expressions. Emily, what are you discussing? Margaret's voice carried clear wariness. Just showing grandmother's care record, Mom, Emily answered calmly. Care record? What's that? Jessica interrupted. Grandma was healthy until recently. Michael showed the journal and said, Jessica, look at this. Aunt Dorothy had been fighting a serious illness for 3 years. And Emily had been caring for her throughout that time. Margaret's face went pale. That's a misunderstanding. We also took care of Mother. A misunderstanding. This time Helen interjected, anger in her voice. Margaret, were you really caring for Dorothy? Silence continued. Margaret and Jessica looked at each other but couldn't answer. Emily reached into her handbag again and pulled out a thick envelope. This is grandmother's will. Emily's voice was quiet but resonated throughout the room. It was officially prepared at a law office. A will? Margaret and Jessica exclaimed simultaneously. Emily took documents from the envelope. Grandmother decided to donate all her assets to a local educational support organization. However, the family photo albums and diary are for my granddaughter Emily, who supported me for 3 years. Margaret reached for the documents, but Michael stopped her. This is an official will. It has the lawyers' and witnesses' signatures, Michael said while examining the documents. But surely family should inherit the assets. Jessica's voice was shaken. Aunt Dorothy had the right to decide how to dispose of her property, Michael explained from a legal perspective. And this will is legally valid. At this point, other relatives in the room began paying attention to the conversation. Emily's uncle Robert stepped forward. Margaret, tell me the truth. How much time did you spend with Mother at the end? Margaret was at a loss for words. After a long silence, she admitted in a small voice. We were busy and couldn't visit frequently. But at the end, we properly. Only the final 3 days, right? Emily quietly interrupted. And even then, only about an hour each day. I spent 3 hours with grandmother every day. The entire room buzzed. The relatives' expressions changed, and their looks toward Margaret and Jessica became stern. Margaret, what is this about? Helen's voice clearly contained reproach. You said at the funeral that you were always by Mother's side. That was, as Margaret began to make excuses, Emily produced the final piece of evidence. This is a letter grandmother wrote during her final week. Emily opened the envelope with trembling hands. She wrote it for me from her hospital bed with the nurse's help. Emily's voice trembled with emotion as she read the letter aloud. Dear Emily, true family is not about blood relations. It's about people who stay by your side during difficult times. Supported by your kindness and love, I was able to have a happy ending. Emily, you are my true daughter. The room was enveloped in complete silence. After a few seconds, someone's quiet sobbing could be heard. Uncle Robert said to Margaret, Margaret, aren't you ashamed? You never visited, yet at the funeral you played the role of devoted daughter and granddaughter. That wasn't our intention. Jessica tried to defend herself, but Helen interrupted with a stern voice. Not your intention. You lied in front of everyone today. You used Dorothy's death to make yourselves look good. The venue became chaotic. Relatives surrounded Margaret and Jessica, hurling harsh words. Meanwhile, people gathered around Emily with warm words. That evening, the events at the assembly room became the talk of the town. One of the attendees was acquainted with a local newspaper reporter, and a small article was published titled, Hidden Truth in Local Notable Family. In the age of social media, the article spread rapidly. Jessica's career as an influencer collapsed overnight. Her followers noticed her hypocritical posts and criticism flooded in. Taking care of your grandmother but shedding tears at the funeral is the worst. The real granddaughter is Emily, fake influencer. Such harsh words were posted one after another. Within a week, her followers dropped from 50,000 to 5,000, and sponsorship contracts were terminated one by one. Margaret also lost her position in local social circles. Her long-cultivated reputation as a woman of dignity was ruined, and she found herself distanced by relatives and friends. Her connections in the real estate industry also turned cold after this incident. As daughters who didn't care for their mother at the end, they were completely isolated. Regarding the inheritance, following Dorothy's wishes, all assets were donated to the local educational support organization. Margaret and Jessica received none of the inheritance they had expected, leaving them in financial difficulty. Jessica especially, having lost her income as an influencer, was forced to return home. Meanwhile, Emily's life changed significantly. After the events at the funeral, many relatives and community members supported her with warm words. Aunt Helen tearfully said, "You are Dorothy's pride," and Cousin Michael helped with legal procedures free of charge. Having received her grandmother's diary and photo albums, Emily quietly read through them. The grandmother's diary especially contained expressions of gratitude toward Emily during those 3 years. The days Emily comes to visit are what I look forward to most. She really listens to my stories. Library happenings, thoughts about books she's read, small daily joys. She treasures everything I tell her. This must be what real love is. Today Emily brought me a new poetry collection. When we read it aloud together, her gentle voice warmed my heart. I'm sorry to Margaret and Jessica, but Emily is truly my heart's support. Soon it will be time to say goodbye. But these 3 years with Emily have been the happiest time of my life. True family isn't about blood relations. It's about people who stay by your side during difficulties. Emily, you are my true daughter. Reading the diary through tears, Emily deeply understood how precious her presence had been to her grandmother. At the same time, she found an answer to the fundamental question of what family means. More than blood relations, the time spent together and the depth of love invested creates true family bonds. Returning to work at the library, Emily began living with more confidence than before. Feeling supported by her grandmother's love, her loneliness eased. Colleagues and patrons, having read the newspaper article and learned about Emily's character, began treating her more warmly. Several months later, Emily began walking a new path in life while treasuring her grandmother's memories. The photo album inherited from her grandmother was displayed in the place of honor in her living room, and reading a little from the diary each night became her habit. Margaret and Jessica contacted her several times seeking reconciliation, but Emily politely declined. While she could forgive, she couldn't return to their previous relationship. Knowing the truth now, there was no point in continuing false family relationships. Emily understood the most important thing her grandmother Dorothy had taught her at the end: family is something you choose, and love is something you show through actions. And that a truly valuable life means devoting your time and affection to someone else. As autumn evening fell, gazing at the sunset visible through the library window, Emily smiled. Her grandmother's love would continue to shine in her heart forever.